On today's Hot Zone, we're going to talk about one of the most civilized hot zones on the planet, London, England, and we're going to have more about the coronavirus outbreak at the end of the show. Stay tuned.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hello, everybody. I'm Chuck Holton, and I appreciate you being here watching the Hot Zone today, or listening if you're on iTunes or Podbean or whatever. Bottom line is we got some great information for you. You know, if you watch the news in the United States right now, there's just so much about the elections, about impeachment, about the Super Bowl, and all kinds of other distasteful things. And really, a lot of the great suffering that's going on in the world, a lot of attacks and threats around the world are not getting much play in the news just because they're not making it that high up in the news cycle. And so I want to bring you some information. You may have heard that there was another attack in London, England, just this last week. And this is another terror attack by a jihadi. It turns out the guy just got out of prison. He stabbed two people before he was shot and killed by undercover police officers. And the reason the undercover police officers were able to get to him so quickly is because they were actually following the guy because he had just got out of prison. And they've had a spate of these guys where they let him out of prison and immediately they go and foment some kind of attack like that. And that's exactly what happened in this case. The really sad thing about that is they let him out of prison about half after only serving half of his sentence. About a year and a half ago, he was picked up and convicted of distributing terrorist literature, of making terroristic threats. He had encouraged his girlfriend to go out and kill infidels, and he had written in his diary that he wanted to become a martyr. That was one of his life goals. Well, I guess he got that one checked off the list there at the end. But England has this terrible habit of letting criminals out after only serving half their sentences. This is their way of being compassionate to criminals. And it turns out that's maybe not such a good idea. They've had at least 3 of these happen now where they let a guy out after half his sentence and he immediately went and started killing people. And this is in a place that is, I mean, they've still got police officers that are not even armed. They've got, this is supposed to be one of the most civilized cities on the planet, but it's incredibly violent. Even though it's almost impossible to get a gun, they make it impossible to get a knife. You have to have a permit to carry bathroom cleaner, for Pete's sake, because they've had so many acid attacks happen over thousands of them over the last few years. As it turns out, you just can't stop people from killing people if that's what they want to do. They've had a lot of ramming attacks. As a matter of fact, I commented on one of those about a year and a half ago on the NRA TV show that I used to be a part of. Listen to this. Law enforcement authorities in London are immediately saying that this is being treated like a terror attack, although this happened right in the same spot, essentially, where there was a major terror attack like that, a very similar attack back in March of last year, where you'll recall, I think it was Khalid Masood was the guy's name, plowed into pedestrians, did the same thing, killing several people, and then got out and started stabbing people. And the difference that we see with this attack and the last one is that when Khalid Masood got out and started stabbing people, the first person he killed was a police officer who was on duty but did not have a weapon. It just is mind-boggling to me that Great Britain still has police officers that wander around with no way to protect their citizens. They're completely unarmed. And this time, the police response was very swift, and it was with armed officers. They got that guy out of the car, and he's now in custody. In his late 20s, we hear, and we don't know a whole lot more about him, and so we'll reserve judgment from then on. But this makes 4 ramming attacks in Great Britain over the last 12 months or so, just maybe 15 months, and 3 of them at least were terrorism. So there you have it, folks. I mean, the bottom line is you're not going to stop people from killing other people if that's what they want to do. You can't legislate this stuff away. There's just no way to do it. You can't legislate the human heart. And that is really what it comes down to, is that evil resides in the human heart. And in order to change that, you've got to change the human heart. And there's only one good way I know to do that, and that's to convert people to Christianity. But that's not politically correct, even though Ann Coulter brought this up years ago and was roundly criticized on the internet for it. She said that if we wanted to fix Afghanistan, the best thing we could do is go over there and kill their leaders and convert the rest of them to Christianity. I know that's not politically correct, but that would actually probably fix the problem. Unfortunately, I mean, it's sad to have to be so politically incorrect. It's sad that that is politically incorrect. Look, if we're going to change people, we've got to change their hearts. If we're going to change their hearts, then we will change the culture, and that's all there is to it. But to try to have your cake and eat it too, let these people have their culture, which is an incredibly violent culture against anybody that they disagree with, and hope that there's not going to be any violence, is just a mad wish. And on that topic, if you're going to let people out of prison halfway through their sentence, maybe that's not such a good idea after all either. Being civilized to criminals, to terrorists, usually doesn't work out too well. But the other side of that coin is that the longer they keep them in prison, the more radicalized they get, because they're allowing them to practice their religion in prison with all their buddies. Now, human rights wise, you kind of have to let them practice their religion if they want, but you don't necessarily have to let them do it with all their friends. And maybe that's a possibility for solving some of this problem, is to separate them up and not let them be together with other jihadis. If you're a jihadi, you're going to get spread out. Or maybe we need to get a little more barbaric about the way we handle these guys. If we can't just simply send them to hell where they belong, then perhaps banishing them and sending them to an island somewhere, or sending them out of the country altogether. Say, hey, you want to be a jihadi? We're going to send you back to Syria. We'll fly you back to Syria, drop you off, tell you to have a good life, and send you back to a radical jihadist country. I mean, that's not the best solution, but it might be better than just letting them out and letting them roam the streets just because we feel like being nice. And so here's what some other eyewitnesses of this most recent attack had to say about the attack. Listen to this.
Just had a very positive meeting with the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. We're going to go away and put together a statement, and we'll be announcing that fairly shortly. It's safe to say that we believe this was an isolated incident. Officers reacted remarkably quickly. Our thoughts are with those who've been injured. There have been 3 people injured, and our thoughts are with them tonight. We'll make a statement very shortly. Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about changing lives. Like I say, this podcast is not just about bringing you the news. It's about trying to make the news a little bit better. And when we talk about changing lives, I want to show you something that that subscribers to the podcast have made a difference in the lives of a little guy and his family here in Panama over the last week. I ran into this kid as I was driving to the airport one day. It was late at night, and he flagged me down by the side of the road, was frantic because he had missed the last bus and he didn't have any way to get home. So we gave him a ride home, and we found out that his mother is kind of a drunk and a drug addict, and she leaves for weeks at a time and leaves this guy and his brothers to fend for themselves. And so they have to steal sometimes to try to get food. The people in their little village know these guys as bad kids because they steal from the local grocery store and things like that. But in a way, you really can't blame them because it's that or starve. And so I put this out there that I wanted to try to help these this family if I could. And listeners to the podcasts responded, one in particular who sent money, and I didn't want to give the money to the little guy because that might not be, he might not spend it the wisest way possible, and I'm certainly not going to give it to his mother, who'd probably drink it away. And so we found out they had a grandmother nearby who is a fine Christian woman, and she does what she can to try to help support this kid on her meager budget of about $150 a month. That's all she makes. So we gave her some money to try to help this guy and his family. I'm gonna leave it at that because I don't want to get too personal into their identities and things like that. But suffice it to say, when I showed up with that money, she burst into tears and started crying and said, "You know, I was just praying that God would send me some help for this little guy and his brothers, and here you are." And so just so you know, I mean, God is working behind the scenes. I want to just play for you just a little bit of what it sounded like when I gave her the money. Entonces, sí. Isn't that powerful? I mean, she was really touched by the generosity of you, our listeners. So keep it up. We're doing our best. We've got some other people that we're helping. I'll bring you those stories later on. Bottom line is we're doing a lot to make the news better, and you're a part of that. So we're leveraging modern technology to do it, and that's a fantastic thing. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the coronavirus as well. And you heard from Ellen Joe Barron here on the podcast not long ago. Just the takeaway there is that the coronavirus is not as deadly as the regular flu, but it does spread more easily, and that's why they've declared a global health emergency about this. But I wanted to bring in a couple more experts on the subject to give you a little deeper, richer understanding of this coronavirus and where we're at right now with this. It's not quite a pandemic, but it's getting there. Listen to this.
But what we have noticed in previous outbreak is that usually people have too much information. And so now we are partnering with other groups such as Google, and they have launched a new project called SOS Alert. And this will help people to have in one place all the information they can have they can find on coronavirus. What we do is really first acknowledge that this infodemic exists and needs a specific treatment. And this treatment is not easy because it requires a lot of global collaboration. For instance, when we had this publication that there was a transmission from asymptomatic cases, people had suddenly the impression that the virus was in the air, and everybody who go under this cloud of virus will be infected. So this is not the situation. Currently, the virus is transmitted through droplets, and you need a close contact to be infected. We try to have still names for viruses, but names that are not affecting either a country, a place, a given community, or people wearing a certain name. So we are really trying to be as neutral as possible, but as helpful as possible as well, because we need also to name things with the same name everywhere in the world if we want to tackle the enemy the same way.
All right, thanks for watching the podcast. I'm Chuck Holton.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.